have our Building Your Path to Success panel with our amazing board members who have different areas of expertise ranging from law, entrepreneurship, finance, and healthcare. Our host, Amina Akram, is the founder and CEO of Ouraan, which is a subscription-based book club designed to help parents build deeper relationships with their children through creative stories. Formerly a litigation associate at Milbank from 2016 to 2020, Amina drew on her legal and entrepreneurial background as well as her personal journey as a mother to launch Ouraan with the goal of fostering meaningful conversations at home. The first panelist we have is Sarah Ashfaq. Sarah is a partner at Goodwin in the technology companies and life sciences group, where she advises clients, particularly in biotechnology and pharmaceuticals, on corporate strategy and major transactions. She has deep expertise and experience in IPOs, private placements, and SEC compliance, and serves as a principal outside counsel to many of her clients. Sarah has worked with companies from founding through growth and joined Goodwin in 2015. Next, we have Ambassador Raphel. Raphel is a former US diplomat and ambassador with decades of experience in South and Central Asian affairs, including service as an Assistant Secretary of State and a US ambassador to Tunisia. A leading expert on Pakistan, she played a key role in shaping US policy in the region, particularly on issues like Kashmir, the Taliban, and democratic development. After retiring from work at the State Department, she continued her work in diplomacy, aid, and advisory roles, and in 2023, she was awarded Pakistan's Hilal-e-Pakistan for her contributions to US-Pakistan relations. Then we have our very own board chair, Dr. Nasar Qureshi. Dr. Nasar Qureshi is the former president and chief medical officer of QDx Pathology Services and currently serves as board chair at the American Pakistan Foundation. A longtime community leader and former president of APNA, he joined APF's board in 2018 and was later named chairman. Under his leadership, APF continues to expand its national network of Pakistani American professionals. And lastly, but not least, we have Zarrar Sehgal. Zarrar Sehgal is a partner at Clifford Chance and serves as the co-head of the industrials, transport and mobility sector, as well as the global financial markets group in the Americas. He leads the firm's global asset finance group, advising on complex asset finance transactions involving aircraft, rail cars, and vessels. With deep expertise in structured finance, securitizations, and acquisitions, Zarrar has worked on numerous award-winning deals and is recognized as a leader in global transport and mobility financing. Now, without further ado, we would like to start our panel. Here you go.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I have to say this panel can't be more cliche than this. 3 lawyers, 3 Pakistani lawyers, and a doctor. I'm so glad you're here. I'll just dive right in because we're short on time. Kashif spoke a lot about his success here, and I wanted to throw this question first at you, Ambassador Raphel. What success meant for you when you first started your career, and has it evolved? For me, it has. It's been a moving target. So I would love to see where you started, how, and today.
Okay, thank you so much. I will try to be brief. First of all, of course, I'm an anomaly here. I'm an American as opposed to a hyphenated American of another sort. I grew up on the West Coast. How many of you have spent any time in Seattle or that area? Anybody? You have, okay. So you probably realize that it's a very different place from the East Coast. Very individualistic, interested in international affairs, but looking further west to the Pacific rather than Washington, D.C. So I certainly did not grow up obsessed with diplomatic service or anything else. When I was in university, the Peace Corps was very popular at that time. So rather than going to the Peace Corps, I took a job teaching at Donovan Women's College in Tehran, Iran, as a thing that a young person did, you know, Peace Corps, whatever. And there I met and married a fellow in the State Department, and after a couple of years of graduate school, moved to Pakistan and joined USAID. My career went on. I shifted from AID to the State Department. My husband at that time, we all went our separate ways, but that was my early introduction to Pakistan in the 70s. And then I went on to a career in the State Department, and how it evolved accidentally. You know, it's the sort of career where it's a good thing to volunteer for things that others might not want to do, and I did that a lot because by that time I was on my own. In those days, especially when you're a more junior person, challenging conventional wisdom was actually quite welcome, and that was something I did. I think because I come from the West and we're sort of contrarian from there. So my career just moved on. I went from Pakistan to India to South Africa, and then when Bill Clinton became president, he was someone I had known when I was at Cambridge and he was at Oxford, and he knew of my interest in this region, and it was the time when they were wanting to put women in positions of responsibility, so I became the Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia. And then I was ambassador to Tunisia and vice president of the National Defense University, and things just, evolved in that way, naturally. And I know, Amina, you had asked me, or you sent us a note saying, what was the most consequential or memorable moments. And that caused me to think, and I would divide it into three, actually. The most memorable moment which was a meeting with Nelson Mandela soon after he was released from prison in South Africa. As you can guess, an extremely compelling personality, and that was very, just a real moment in my life. I think the most consequential thing that I did was in Iraq in 2003, when I joined the first civilian group that went in after the war had started. I'd like to say after the shooting had stopped. It stopped for a couple of weeks and then of course took up again. And there I was working with the Ministry of Trade, which was responsible for the public distribution system on which many Iraqis depended for their food and daily necessities. So I worked to get that started. And despite what I thought or anyone else thought about that whole enterprise, I did feel like that was a very important thing to do, and it was I think consequential for the Iraqis and for those of us who were intimately involved. And then finally, I would say the most rewarding thing of my career is my long association with Pakistan. It was an accident of my career. I started out there in the 70s, working for AID, and then later when I was assistant secretary, I traveled there frequently, and later as vice president of the National Defense University, we would take groups of officers there. So I was able to keep my contacts going, and some of the people I met in the 70s subsequently became ambassadors, became ministers, and certainly secretaries of government.
Right.
So that was very rewarding.
I think two themes that I'm taking, which are very common denominators from Kashif's keynote, is this the accidental, the accidental ambassador. I can write a book about that. This is a question for you, Sarah. How flexible one needs to be in this early stage of your career, and how intentional. I think this is something perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know how to turn this on, so for a brown person, I'm hopeless with technology, but I think I did it.
It's
great.
Innate.
How intentional? Well, I've never been very intentional about my career. My parents are very religious, and since I was little, it was very clear I was supposed to get married. That was it. There was no college, there was no higher education. except I was like kind of good at school. So then when it was time to, apply to colleges, I was like, well, I'm gonna apply, and they were like, why would you do that? Go to Nassau Community College. And I was like, well, that's okay, maybe. So I applied to a bunch of colleges, got into a number of them. I went to Baruch because they gave me a full scholarship. And so because my parents were like, you absolutely cannot take out any loans, right? They're haram. And so I was like, okay. I was 17 years old. So I went to Baruch, and I think Gasha said take advantage or work to your strengths. Baruch is really good at accounting, and so I was like, well, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to study accounting because that's what they're really good at. So I did that, and then I didn't know what to do. When you study accounting, you get a CPA, so I did that. Then I worked at PwC for 3 years because that's what you do to get the CPA. Then 9/11 happened, and I was living in New York, and my dad got detained at the airport, and it was horrible. We all knew what was going on, Patriot Act, etc. And so I was like, I always knew I was gonna go back to school, but I didn't know for what. At this point, my parents were like, lost cause, she's kind of got a career thing, but they were still trying to marry me off, desperately. So I started thinking about law school, and I was like, what do I have to do to get into law school? So I was a little strategic about that, but that was probably the most strategic I think I've been in my life. So I started working on the CARRY campaign, which is where I met Kashif. I volunteered with ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. I was translating for Pakistanis who, were being questioned by the government, etc. My Urdu is not good enough to do that, but it improved. And then I got into law school eventually. I went to Penn, studied for 3 years, and then I had this boatload of debt and didn't know what to do with myself. I mean, I really at this point thought I was gonna marry rich because that was the only way I saw a way out of, my parents were also very modest means. My dad was a handyman in between his jamaats, right? So the marrying rich thing was not working out for me, and I had a lot of loans. So I went to a large law firm, which is what most people do when they go to, law school. And I worked there for 6.5 years. And I wasn't intentional at all. I kind of just was like floating along. I had probably pretty serious imposter syndrome. Like I didn't think I belonged there. I did not think I could be successful there. So I just, do. Then I got married. Not rich, just in case you're wondering. Yeah. Nice guy though. And then we had a kid, took maternity leave, and then I finally got back from maternity leave, and I was like, holy cow, I'm a senior associate. By this point, I was like, I have a career. Now what am I actually doing? So that's when I finally was like, I need to find a different job. I really didn't like the firm I was at. So I moved over to the firm that I'm at now. And even at this firm, I thought I would go get a couple of years of experience and then go in-house or something. But I was good at my job. People were recognizing that. And then they started talking about partnership, and they were like, so what are you thinking about for partnership? And I was like, what? Are you talking to me? But I also had gone to enough women's stuff that I had learned when someone asks you about partnership, you say, yes, I want to make partner. You don't ever say, I'm not sure. You don't give any, show no weakness. So I was like, of course I'm going to make partner. And then I did. I had to work at it. I worked a lot of hours. I worked on different types of projects, got to know people at the firm, traveled a lot. Like I put in the work. But it wasn't planned. It was kind of just like things were moving along and they were going okay. And now 10 years in at this law firm, I'm, very, very firmly have a career, and I've acknowledged it, and I'm proud of it, but it's not something I was thoughtful about when I was younger. When I see young people now and they're really thoughtful, I think that they're probably gonna be a lot more successful than I am because they actually are doing the things that they need to be doing. But I think, things kind of sometimes work out.
I wonder about that because it's two of us sitting here, two brown women who are lawyers, and it's such a similar story. No pressure at all from my parents to do anything in life but marry rich. And she was in Long Island, I was in Lahore. So, some things just cross barriers. And there's something to be said for young parents here putting no pressure on your kids. but I think I was quite sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. My mother would kick me under the table anytime a guy asked me, are you going to practice if you move to the US? And I used to say yes. And she was like, oh, she's just getting cultured. You know, that mama has the same degree. But I think I was quite flexible in terms of where I wanted to be, okay, in White & Case wouldn't hire somebody who didn't have JD from US, and I just had an LLM in my New York bar. And thank God, like Kashif, everything has a silver lining. So I was flexible in where I started my career, how I changed it, and the routes that I went to Brazil, and I remember I'm driving down their main marginal, and I'm saying, well, that's Pinheiro Neto, that's where I want to work. So I think there's something to be said about being, intentional, but just being flexible as well. So moving on to this other issue that you hit on, the relationships that Kashif also hit on. I think that is so critical, right? And Zarrar and Dr. Q, I want to ask you both about, that aspect in your careers. How I want to come back to this pressure of being somebody that Sarah and I didn't share. But about how do you build relationships, and how do you know, like Kashif, you said, like picking the right boss. How do you know that's the right guy, and how do you continue?
Yeah, first of all, I'm in awe of people like Sarah. I'm a partner at a law firm as well, but my path was much easier, I would say, than yours was. So, first of all, that's a tremendous story. I'll tell you a little story that maybe pales in comparison to yours. My first day I started in Millbank as well. Now, this was the late 90s, so slightly different era. In those days, Millbank is what's considered a white shoe firm. I don't think they use that terminology anymore, but thankfully they've got rid of it. So the first day you're taken out by what's called the senior partner for a long liquid lunch, so to speak. So he takes me out, he said, you can order something to drink, it's perfectly fine. I said, I don't drink. He said, oh, okay, no problem. So we have this nice long lunch. At lunch he says, next weekend, why don't you come out and we'll play golf, at my club. I said, I don't play golf. He looks at me and says, son, you don't drink and you don't play golf. I don't think you're gonna have a long career in law. So, 27 years later, here I am. But I think what's critical is, and I tell this to the young lawyers as well, mentorship. I think it's about finding the right mentors. And I think law firms in particular, and I think most organizations, banks, etc., do a better job of assigning mentors to particular individuals. And I don't know about others, but I think it goes beyond mentorship. I think you now need a sponsor, a true champion who will take you through, especially to become a partner. You can last at a law firm for a long time having good mentors. If you're smart, if you're hardworking, most law firms will keep you around. But to become a partner or to really rise, you need somebody who's a sponsor. And I think to identify that sponsor, and for that sponsor to identify you as somebody that has potential, I think that relationship becomes critical. And I think that relationship really carries you. And I think the best people who become partners, who've been my junior associates, senior associates, that relationship has been key. And even in the cases where they haven't come to fruition, where they've become partners, they've become clients of mine. So you talk about relationships. So you build these relationships when they've gone in-house or they've gone and done other things, and we've maintained these relationships, and they've built other relationships and so forth. And again, these relationships start early in your career,
right.
And I think you build on them.
Right. I see a lot of. I think I don't want to. My sister's gonna come and squeeze my throat if I say millennials and attribute something to millennials, but I think in the younger folks, I see a lot of bridge burning. If something doesn't work out instantly, oh, he didn't open that door for me, and that's death, right? Like that's the relationship I'm going to put a cross on, and perhaps that's, I think, the wrong attitude, right? Like I think there's some people fail to see sometimes beyond what is in that person's capacity at that time, or how the hands can be tied by a firm or the policy. Dr. Q, just throwing this question at you. You're in the medical field, and you've done so much across the board, from technical to non-technical to entrepreneurial. managerial community. What's your take on this building relationships across cultures as well? Because you've done such a fantastic job of just getting out of your community and just making sure that we don't silo ourselves, even as it pertains to this organization.
So over the 20 years, starting QDx Pathology, with about, I generally speak quite loud, everyone. So over since 2000 and since 2006, November, that I started this, I went and bought a building of 10,000 square feet. 3 months later, the seller came for something and he said, "Why did you buy the building? It's empty." But by 2009, I ran short of space. And I had 120 employees at that time, or co-workers. But that's not the mark of success. We can talk about it later. People consider that a mark of success. It is not. But I had mostly white people who were in the technical field, etc. And I definitely want to help Pakistani origin. And we had Mr. Pakistan's ambassador's person. Can I take it? That's the UN ambassador, the new UN ambassador to Pakistan. I don't know where I was. I won't speak to
I think we can move to the next question.
Yeah. So you were talking about equity. I ensured that I have Pakistanis, but I also ensured that I have African Americans and Filipinos. There were troubles, but I just wanted to make sure that people who are underprivileged, and we trained them. We got them fresh, trained them, and they rose. So that's what I did. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. I think so. For Sarah and Zarrar, there's a question for you. If there was one mindset or habit that you see is lacking in today's, say, the first years that come in, walk in the door, what would that be? And what you had, what would you want to see?
It's a tough question because I feel like we're picking on them.
Yeah,
it's okay.
I mean, I actually find them, I have to say, extraordinarily bright. You know,
For sure.
I think they're much more organized than I was. I think in some ways they know, like Sarah, I didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, when I first got to Millbank, you know, in a couple of years I did, but when you first get there, law school doesn't train you to do anything. You know, what law school trains you to do is get a job. I mean, effectively, that's what law school trains you to do. And so I do find, I think maybe that is the issue. Maybe I think first-year lawyers come with these preconceived notions of what it means to be a lawyer. And I think when they get to the firm, you know, that illusion is shattered very quickly. And I think when that illusion is shattered very quickly, they get into this, they go down this rabbit hole of why are things not what they're supposed to be. And I think we were, at least when I say we, I'm generalizing, I think we were realists. Now, I'll talk about myself because, like Kashif, I come from Pakistan. I think, you know, coming from Pakistan and having that sort of immigrant mentality, I think we understood that there are a lot of obstacles that we had to go through. So we see an obstacle, you know, we'll either blast through it, get around it, find a way to negotiate through it. They see an obstacle and they're like, why is this obstacle there? And we're just going to stop here and keep looking at that obstacle, and maybe somebody will move the obstacle, or there'll be a Jedi mind trick, and I'm getting myself Star Wars reference, and the obstacle will move, you know, move itself, you know. So I think that really, to me, is the biggest issue, this idea of a preconceived notion of what a job or what being a lawyer or banker or consultant entails, and not being, so maybe it's the being rigid versus being flexible.
You think it suits is to be blamed?
Well, suits, but I think partners like me to be blamed as well. We don't look like, you know, Harvey Specter, so I think, you know, that illusion gets shattered very quickly. You know, day one. So.
Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was a great answer. I don't have a lot to add. I think the only thing I would add is I think when we were younger, when we started our career, when I started 16 years ago as a lawyer, we just knew you had to grind. Like, that was the expectation. There was no weekend, there was no personal time, there was no social life. We just had to work. And these younger generations, you know, think differently, and good for them because they're living, I hope, happier, more fulfilling lives. But balancing that with, you know, us older folks who just, you know, worked all the time, I think is a little, you know, challenging. And I think the most valuable associates and juniors I have are the ones who are just, you know, willing to grind, no questions asked, because they learn the most and they're really valuable.
Now this is a question for Robin and you. As women, what investments did you make in your careers early on that really paid off?
Well, when I joined the Foreign Service, it was just the beginning of a wave of women coming into this profession. So we were kind of, it's not that there weren't people in it before, but in terms of a critical mass, that was my generation. And, you know, of course, there was a lot of conforming you had to do and so on and so forth. But at the time, we didn't think about it. And I think my generation benefited from a moment when it was thought that you really had to bring more women into leadership positions. And to be honest, when I saw which women they put into these deputy assistant secretary jobs, they all would have been there 5 years before if they'd been men. So it was time. It was time. But if I might ask, just so that I know, has anybody here worked for the government or has a plan to work for the government?
Unfortunately.
Well, this too shall pass.
No, I worked past tense.
Past, okay. No, I asked that because, you know, I know there are a lot of lawyers and finance people and medical people, particularly the Pakistani diaspora, and from the perspective of Washington, we miss you in the federal government. And I just want to encourage people, and have those of you who have children coming of age, to encourage them to, if this kind of career suits them, a career of service, and it is very rewarding, service is very rewarding, if your mind works that way. And the trade-off, of course, is not very much money, but the rewards are more psychological. And it used to be, and I think it will be again, a career of stability in terms of that it's hard to get fired, just saying. It used to be hard to get fired. You know, and in the diplomatic service, you move around a lot. Okay, that has family trade-offs and all sorts of things. But I think working in a career of service is something to be explored if it at all appeals to you. And you know, one of the more challenging things is what the Pakistani ambassador in Washington, D.C. is facing right now, 24/7, you know, having to articulate and figure out how to persuade people to look at these recent events from the Pakistani point of view. He's done a very good job of that. It's hard work, but it's creative work and it's rewarding work. So that's my pitch.
So I guess as a woman, you asked about from a woman's perspective. I think that the thing I probably invested in, which I didn't realize at the time, was just kind of setting my life up to let me work. And I mean, by this I mean, I was at Davis Polk, it's also like a white shoe, New York City firm, when I had my first child. And any of the women who were still there after they had their children had full-time nannies, some of them had second nannies, and that was just the norm. So I didn't even think about, do I need a nanny or not? It was like, I need a nanny, I'm gonna get a nanny. And I think that if I hadn't had those women around me with that setup already, I would have been like, oh, maybe I could do daycare, I could drop a kid off and pick a kid up, you know, at these times, but everyone was like, that's gonna be impossible, you're gonna have to work late, you're gonna have to go in early, you'll never get there. So I think I got a nanny early on, a full-time nanny, and my kids are 12 and 9, and we still have a full-time nanny. And she has grown kids, and I could say, I need to travel tomorrow for 3 days, and she could stay over 3 days. So that gives me a lot of flexibility. You know, that just really opens up me to be able to do a lot. I also think having a partner that makes it easy to do the things you need to do. If my husband was working the types of hours that I work and traveling the way I work, I don't know that I would work this way, or that he would work that way, rather I shouldn't say. He's a doctor though, and they don't work that hard, just, you know, no offense, but compared to, you know.
Well, I mean the lawyers work very hard.
So
We don't get paid like them on the finances.
So he, you know, he does shift work. He knows when he's working and he knows when he's off. So that makes it much easier for us to plan our lives and our travel and our schedules. And I know he can always, you know, take care of the kids or whatever it is. So I really do think setting up those systems for myself helped me. And I see that with a lot of my colleagues and women at the firm I'm at now, which doesn't have this culture. A lot of them have, like, you know, their in-laws watching the kids, they use childcare, and they make it work, but it is a lot harder. You know, it's just, that's probably the hardest thing, I think.
Yeah, and I think in law, where I think we're very well compensated, it works, but there's some professions where you may not be, and sometimes you kind of are breaking even, right? Like you're just saying, I'm paying this for childcare, what am I bringing home? And in my view, that kind of pays off, because it's just a few years that you're in that grind, and you eventually, and that's, I see, where a lot of women pause and don't get support from their partners, just because of their earning power. So I think that's what you say about the partners just being really there for you, even when in that crunch time. It's critical for just women in the room, especially, to, I think, just think it long term and not pause there.
I think that's so true. I remember, you know, I wasn't always a partner. I was an associate. I was making way less than I don't make a lot, but, you know, I was making less. But I, you know, on weekends, my husband was a resident or a fellow, right? So his schedule was a little bit harder. We had to have nannies or babysitters on the weekend. And I used to say, I'm working, I'm paying to work, which is like crazy, right? And it would make me so mad. But I just kind of kept going with it because I don't know, I'm lazy. I don't want to change anything.
Dr. Q, question for you. If you've been at crossroads in your career where you had to really take a leap of faith and just jumping in the dark.
When I opened the lab.
And
people thought I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Because no one goes and opens an independent lab, it's question lab code.
Mm-hmm.
I went home and told my wife, I was associated with the lab where I had 25% equity, they sold it, I could get $8 amount, they tried their best for me to sign non-compete, offered me for a pathologist a lucrative offer, and I said, no, what you're doing? Non-compete isn't going to happen. I have a following around New Jersey. I was still a professor, assistant professor at Columbia. I had a reputation. My wife said, if it doesn't work, what are you going to do? And I just smiled. I said, I'll go work for someone else, but I'm never going to work for someone else again. I want to work for myself, which was much harder than life. So I got a bank loan, bought a building which I thought would work, and started in New Jersey. New Jersey, I had a reputation as a pathologist. When that became successful, I went to Florida and Los Angeles. Now there's one big thing. When I was just in New Jersey, my net profit was much higher. Then I started dumping in everything into growth. So I was taking less money home. And you've got to make a balance with that. Because as you expand, you're burning your dollar. But that moment was a hole which I had to decide I'm going down that rabbit hole or not.
Right.
But I had to try it.
You had to try it. Yeah. So you think, you know, there's always this debate about, Kashif also hit on, be passionate about what you do, right? And I'm guilty of giving advice to women, especially. I think I was telling Robin that I wasn't going to share this story, but I need to, I think. My cousin, who's a brilliant artist, never went to art school, asked me, and now is working in London at one of the top financial institutions, asked me, Amina, you know, do you think I should go for my MBA, or I just love painting? And she'd done undergrad. So of course you're going for your MBA. You're a great artist without going to art school. But she had it rough. she was, raised by a single mom in a very rough environment in Pakistan. So I gave her that advice: go to business school, and now she's, mashallah, doing very well. How do you? And I know that's not what we preach. But what do you have to say? I would ask Robin, because you follow your passion. I think something has to be said, especially about women and their economic independence. I feel very strongly about. So please do dissuade me.
Well, I'll tell a quick story too. My family were second generation immigrants from Sweden and Czechoslovakia. And of course they were very keen on education, like people are. But my mother would always say to the three girls in my family, we were just three girls, you have to get your education, because what if something happens? What if your husband leaves you or dies or something? You have to be able to support yourself. So that was this very practical advice that was given to my sisters and myself. But of course that, wasn't so relevant when it came down to it. We all did what
Right.
we wanted to do and enjoyed doing. And I think, as I say, I was an accidental diplomat, but I fell into the thing that really suited me temperamentally. And I think if it hadn't, I would have changed careers, but fortunately I didn't have to.
So a quick question, Maha, do we have time? How much time do we have? 5 minutes, okay. So I'll do a rapid round, quick for the round. Best advice that you ever got from a mentor?
I had amazing mentors. If not for mentors up and down here, and I would say it very openly, all Jewish, I would not be where I am. Nothing is accidental, I want to refer to that. It's directed, and they see your potential. And I'll tell you why, and I'll end there. When I went for a job after my fellowship at Mount Sinai to Beth Israel, the chair of pathology there said, I'll give you want head of microbiology, I've selected your senior at Mount Sinai, but there's no virology lab within Manhattan. You've just gotten a PhD in virology, I want you to set it up under such and such condition. You will do a residency. I said, Dr. I'm not doing a residency. Done up my PhD, a fellowship, I'm ready to go. My kids are growing up in my mind. My wife's saying, when are you going to earn real money? She said, no, I won't give you that job otherwise. Called up my wife, she said, do what you have to. And I said, I'll only do clinical pathology. That went great. 2 years later, I said, sign my certificate to go take the board. He said, I'm not signing it. I said, come on, Dr. Teplitz. He said, now you'll do anatomic pathology. The reasoning he gave me the first day was, unless you do a residency, you will never be recognized in this country as a physician. And then he forced me to do residency. And then he said that you would stay here. So, and in other words, Varananda, he said, you don't know yourself. You're a triple threader. You don't, and I never had that term. Just got off the bus from Pakistan sometimes back. And he said, you don't recognize your potential, listen to me and do what I'm saying. He made my entire career. So, if you're around the right people, and if they recognize your potential, they'll give you the opportunity, but you have to prove yourself. Thanks.
Sarah, for you, best advice?
I think that's exactly right. Like, if you see someone who recognizes your potential and takes an interest in you, listen to that person. There's mentors, like law firms have tons of formal mentorship programs, and a lot of other organizations do too. I find they don't actually really work that well. It's the informal mentors that, if you can find one and they want to support you, I owe my success to these people that showed up that I never expected.
Zarrar, for you, the best advice you got?
Yeah, my mentor, he was a terrific lawyer, very tight in the industry, but was frankly a terrible human being. He terrorized me on a daily basis. I still have just that PTSD from the best quote about him was, family is very important to him, his family. When he canceled Thanksgiving after Thanksgiving, New Year's after New Year's, But he demanded excellence on a daily basis. And I am probably the lawyer today I am because of him. And so I owe him that. But I think indirectly what he taught me also is what not to do with the associates that I have mentored and become partners. It made me a more humane mentor and sponsor. And I think the partners that I've become, I think it taught us how to be excellent lawyers, but I think you can be balanced in your approach. I don't think you have to be, if you excuse my language, a complete a-hole about it on a daily basis, which he was. But that's because he came from a generation where, he came from the 40s, 50s generation where they were building these New York law firms, Davis Polk, Milbank, Cravath, these were being built. So they were sort of fighting for position. And a lot of that fighting still goes on for clients, but I think law firms have become more humane as well.
So that's interesting that you also learned what not to become.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you see groups and, the group that I had, or, the groups I had, they're just a more, as lawyers go, they're happier places. Ultimately lawyers go to dark places very quickly, but that's just who we are. We see conspiracies very quickly, we see evil where there's none, that's just who we are. But ultimately, it's as happy as we'll get.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. Robin, for you?
Well, mentors are important, of course, but they're hard to choose, and it's hard to know when there's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you should keep your eye out, but I would say, and this reflects partly the kind of business that I was in, you need to learn to think for yourself and not get drawn into groupthink. And this is very important in Washington, D.C., which has become a sea of groupthink over the last 20 years. And that is what the current crowd is trying to correct, even though they don't realize that's what they're trying to correct. And they're not being very effective at it, but that really did happen, this sort of groupthink about policies. So you've got to constantly try to keep your eye on the ball and not get drawn one way or another by what everybody else thinks. That's one. The second thing, and it's been alluded to here, but it really is a serious matter. Don't give everything to your career, or by the time you're 85, as Kashif was noting, you will say, what was my life worth? So there really does need to be some focus on family, and I think every profession is understanding that more now, which is, I think, a good thing.
I'd like to share just, I got some advice when I first moved to New York. I was looking for a job here. So she wasn't a mentor, she's a partner at one of the big firms, and she just went to my law school. When she saw my resume, she met me for coffee. She was, I think, Korean American. And she gave me some really brutal advice, which I took it not very well, didn't take it very well at the time. She said, listen, I'd like you to request a coffee because you're Pakistani. It'll be, especially in New York, because perhaps the person that you were sending your resume to just was with a Pakistani driver in his cab. So you want to get over that bias, which was brutal to hear, but so critical, where I would email people and just request 15-minute coffees so they could just meet me in person and kind of get rid of the stereotype notion that they had by looking at my resume or my name. So I just wanted to share that. It's sometimes very crude advice can be, I think it helped me a lot in my career. Another rapid round question, it's like one word. Favorite app?
I am 65.
What's up?
No, I hate it. It carries me. Facebook it used to be. Now I want to go away from all apps, and I've never subscribed to apps or threads.
Okay.
None of that. But can I share for 30 seconds? He was talking about mentors.
Yeah.
Just 30 seconds. So after I did my PhD, I got offered everywhere. Wife wanted to come to New York. Mount Sinai accepted me when I went there. After my interview, the professor was probably one of the most top 3 microbiologists in the country. Took me out of the lunch. It was December, raining and snowing. We're standing on 96th Street, trying to cross the road. He looks at me and he says, "Now I know why are you so bitch-faced?" That was the word he used. I said, "Oh crap." Then I was wearing formal black shoes with laces. He said, "Your laces are tied too tight." And I said, I've accepted the fellowship, I want to be there. But he was an amazing mentor. But yeah, So you could have been distracted before because of that, but you've got to choose a guy what he did all day long with you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Shay. Is that our favorite app?
Seamless.
Favorite app?
Falsetto?
What's that?
I'll tell you later.
Robin, favorite app?
I am most definitely not an app person. The one I use the most is Uber.
For 3 months that I'm retired, I constantly say I miss my peoples. I had an IT guy, I had an app guy, I had an accountant. I don't know how to fix a printer. I call them all the time.
Okay, last question. I promise you, Mama. One book. I'm a book person. So I have to get one book that you recommend that everybody should read, must read.
Must read. Must read. No, I recommend a book that is not, it's not really profound in terms of being well known or anything else, but it's about a journey. And it's called Narrow Road to the Far North, about an Australian doctor who was on the Bhutan Death March. And it brings together many, many aspects of life and lessons in life in a very profound way.
Zarrar, this is a tough question for you.
It really is. You know it is because you know the poet side. Noise.
Noise.
Yeah.
Sarah?
I haven't read a book. I mean, we're reading Harry Potter right now in my house. It's great. So I don't have a lot of time to read.
Dr. Q?
I was into politics in medical school. I read Das Kapital, cover to cover. I will suggest everyone read it. Don't believe everything it says. If you know what that book is. It's about the Russian philosophy.
Could you repeat that, please?
Huh?
Dr. Q, your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. The Ask Kapital. I was civilly into politics. I was on the left, and I read that cover to cover, and The Prince. But take the positive out of it. It's fascinating. Read both of those books. Don't become communist. Communism doesn't work anymore. But read it if you have time. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. To the panelists, so grateful for your time. And really
Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.